I'm scared.
Cool. Ready to get started?
When you're ready, take it away, boys. Thank you very much.
Sick. All right. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. Obviously, we've had quite a lot of discussions around like strength and conditioning today, which incorporates things like the stretching and pretty much everything we see on the posters at the start of the session. So myself and Josh are going to be going through strength and conditioning for parkour athletes, and particularly its application back into coaching. I think this is quite important for us because, as you can see, we're not the smallest of people in the parkour world. Yeah, we're quite big boys, which means naturally we take quite a lot of force. And unfortunately, over the course of our career, we've had our fair share of injuries. And I think single-handedly, since stepping into the world of S&C and learning a lot more about it, it's kind of saved us in many, many ways.
Not me.
Maybe not you. Maybe old age has got to some of us more than others. But me personally, it's definitely saved me. And I'd say without the work that I've put in with S&C, I probably wouldn't be in the position that I am today. And that means that I can keep my students safe as well, because there is a bit of a stigma in parkour with send it in the younger culture. And obviously that's our job as coaches to kind of prevent that, but there's only so much we can do. So, here's a little bit about the contents that we're going to be going through. So what is S&C, why we do it, performance attributes, fundamental elements to consider when training, the hierarchy of importance regards to structured programming, principles of programming, examples of programming, exercise selection, sets and volume, warm up and cool down, periodization, the lot. And a lot of it could blow your minds depending on how much knowledge you have on strength and conditioning. A little bit of background as to myself and Josh. I've got a degree in sports science and coaching, so a lot of this is stuff that I studied in university and then apply to my coaching nowadays. And you're a level 3 personal trainer.
Yeah, I've been coaching for 17 years and PT for 15 years. And I started at like international judo, so I went to like all the like squad things, and that meant had to do all that conditioning, learn how to lift weights at a young age, all that kind of stuff. So that affected everything else and has led me down to this stuff basically.
Essentially, this PowerPoint is hopefully going to enable you guys to either think about your own strength and conditioning and programming, the programming for potentially your athletes within your team, whether that's your coaches or potentially your students as well, and just have a little bit more of an understanding about how things work in the body to kind of prevent injury. So moving forward, what is strength and conditioning? Essentially, it's supplementary training that aids as a tool to improve your physical attributes. And by physical attributes, we're talking about things such as power, speed, strength, and that is ultimately to boost your performance in your sport, in which case for all of us, it's parkour, but for some of you that might extend further than parkour as well. It's also for injury, I'm not going to use the word prevention, because that's not really the best way, I suppose, but it's injury reduction. You can't really prevent an injury altogether, but you can most certainly do everything in your power to reduce the chances of injury. And particularly one thing that I find that most people don't pay attention to in parkour, especially if you're an athlete of a decent level and say you've maybe been training for like 5 or 6 years, your body has the physical ability to do the skills that you've learned, but it doesn't necessarily have the ability to withstand the force that you're putting under it. And that was a big message that I had to learn, because I got one injury and then I came back and I was like, oh, sick, guess it's time to go back to doing the skills we were doing before. And I had the ability to do those skills and physically replicate them, but my body didn't have the ability to withstand the force, which naturally led into the next injury, and then the next injury, and then it's kind of just a snowball effect from there.
An important point here as well is that S&C isn't just like lifting weights. S&C could be like incorporated into your parkour training as well. Like strength and conditioning is your ability to repeat the same action as well. So it's like not just the strength that you have to do it, but can you repeat it multiple times? So if you can last for an hour training, you're not going to get as much volume as if you can do 4 hours. That could be part of what we're thinking about here as well.
Rehabilitative work often encompasses a lot of like strength and conditioning, specifically when we're looking about like mobility and stuff like that. Like Jesse and Josh have both got like ACL injuries, so it means that their range of motion in a lot of places and their physical strength is incredibly difficult to kind of get back to that stage where it was before. And within their rehabilitation, a lot of the stuff that they were doing was like S&C work, whether it be things like, I'm going to use an example for like Jesse's back when he done his back in. Once he got to a place where he was actually comfortable, it was about loading the spine, not just using the body's own weight, but using additional weight as well. So things like Jefferson curls, where you're standing on an elevated platform and you're elongating those hamstrings, but you're doing it with resistance. That's going to build up higher tolerance, which will then translate better back into parkour when we're under huge impact. So why should we do S&C? It's pretty simple. It's to improve physical performance as much as we can, specifically looking at those attributes, again, to reduce but not prevent the risk of injury. And for a greater understanding of complex movements, obviously S&C, there's a huge world all the way from like body weight training all the way up to like powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting. So we're not saying do S&C so you can learn how to do the perfect snatch. That's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is a lot of those movements that encompass multiple chain connections and stuff like that translate back into parkour, whether that be directly or indirectly, because you're training multiple parts of the body at once, you're having to focus on different movement patterns and that sort of thing.
I'd say one of the main things there is you don't want that to interrupt your main training. It's an assistant to your main training. If you end up finding like, you might end up being a bodybuilder and not a parkour athlete in the pursuit of being better at parkour. In that case, obviously that's then not S&C, that's bodybuilding and you do parkour. So just keep that in mind. That's the like pitfall I see probably the most, is that people start getting into conditioning, they love conditioning, and then they're conditioning 4 or 5 times a week, and they're doing parkour once a week, and they're like, oh, I'm really good at jumping really far now, but they're terrible at everything else, and there's so much skill involved in parkour that we can't just take skill out. Like, if we take skill out of it, then we're stuck with just strength. It's not a strength sport necessarily.
In terms of performance attributes, we're talking about things like speed, so the ability to actually move quickly, force production or strength, so absolute strength, power, which is often misconceived by a lot of people, unless you have like a bit of knowledge into, I guess, physics and sports science and that sort of stuff. Power is force and speed, so the ability to produce force but produce it quickly. And usually if you talk to like kids in your class, you might even have heard coaches just go, more power. It's really not helpful. It's not a helpful cue in any way, shape or form, especially if the person that you're saying more power to doesn't know what power is. I guarantee if you go to any of your kids back in your classes and go, can you explain to me what power is, without using the word power, they'll go, don't really know. So if you have an understanding of that as a coach, that then enables you to pass that information on to the next generation, which means that when we are using these slightly complicated terms, they actually know what you're referring to. Obviously, mental attributes, resilience and confidence, mobility, which is the range of motion in your joints, and flexibility, which is the range of motion in and around your muscles, and then coordination. We are going to be coming on to like mobility and flexibility a little bit later, and maybe our opinions are slightly biased, and I don't want to rub that off onto you, but in my opinion, there is a strong advantage to one more so than the other. So fundamental elements to consider when training strength and conditioning. These are just some examples of some of the things that you could be doing to increase those physical attributes. So when we're talking about impulse and power, the idea is moving heavy weights, but moving it quickly. So not just being able to deadlift like whatever, 300 kilos or whatever, but being able to do it with intent. And obviously parkour is all about intent. When we're doing these movements, a lot of the time, it's like max power, so max force and max speed together. Obviously plyometrics is basically the bread and butter of our sport, but I feel like there is definitely a huge array of athletes out there that just don't understand it, don't know how to prescribe it, don't know where to start, don't know how to do anything in terms of injury prevention, and therefore when you're incorporating plyometrics on top of existing parkour training, on top of S&C training, it is a recipe for disaster if you don't know how to prescribe it properly. Similarly with sprints, I'm sure we've all done a session where we've gone into sprint, pulled our hamstring pretty much straight away. But with that being said, sprints are absolutely fantastic because that is the speed aspect of that power chain that we were talking about. So it's one of those things where you don't really need any equipment, you just literally need your body. So there's no excuses for not being able to train that, and therefore it makes it quite accessible to a huge array of people. And then going off to what Josh was saying earlier about like the bodybuilder style training, that's what we kind of consider hypertrophy. So you probably heard that term previously, and that basically refers to like the building of muscles, but it's good for like flexibility on tension under range as well. So say for example, you have an injury, like myself, I ruptured my bicep tendon here, just moving a box, believe it or not. I moved a box, arm hyperextended, boom, tendon completely ruptured. About 6 weeks later, I was pretty much back to it. A lot of the things that I was doing was hypertrophy based because it's allowing me to rebuild that strength under tension, which is exactly where the tendon went ping. It was strength under tension, and that tension was too much in comparison to the strength, which resulted in that injury. So simple things like knowing that enables me now to be able to combat that in the future. And then obviously we've got things like cardio, flexibility and mobility as well. If there are any questions at any point throughout this, guys, obviously just do throw your hand up and we are happy to stop. But equally, there will be a little bit of time at the end. And like Nico was saying, we're happy to send out these PowerPoints to people. It is filled with a bit of information. Some of it's a little bit more dumbed down than others. So if you have any questions, just fire them away. In terms of the hierarchy of importance when programming, do you want to go on to this?
Yeah, I'll go on to it. So basically, with the hierarchy of importance, it's more about looking at the athlete or yourself and then assessing what you actually need. So to start off with, what I said first is if you're not doing parkour training, then the S&C is not that important. Actually do your parkour training. If you have little time, so say you work a 9 to 5 or worse than that, then you might run out of time. You might feel like, oh, I want to get 3 sessions in parkour. How am I going to fit my gym in? Well, the answer is maybe you can't, or maybe 1 session a week actually is going to get a lot out of it. And then in that case, we'd think about things like, is plyometrics make sense if we're already jumping so much? At least we're getting some stimulus there, whereas we might not be doing any absolute strength. We might not be doing any like coordination strength and stuff like that. So they're like the main things. The other thing is like, say everything's working really well and then you want to target something. Say you're very strong for your legs, but your upper body's weak. You found that jumps are always working for you, but things like climb ups are really difficult to attain. And genetically, we are going to be different there. You might find that you train exactly as much as the next person on the same skill, your technique's the same, and it's not working. That's where we can use this kind of bridge genetic gaps a little bit. So if you want to do as little training as possible in the S&C world, look at where it's like, where am I behind that's going to give me the biggest boost? We can move on from there.
I think just one more thing that I want to say is this first part, time and fatigue management, is incredibly important, especially because parkour is a heavy sport as it is. Like, I'm sure you guys know what it feels like to do a day's worth of coaching and then go out training the next day. And then to think on top of that, oh, I've got to squeeze in 3 sessions in the week. Are you joking me? And that's where injuries and stuff can happen. So when it comes to programming, if you are a parkour athlete that is doing all of these things, that's where it's really like essential actually that you work with a coach. And that could be a coach that is either in your organization that has a bit of knowledge, or you could outsource that. So for those of you that don't know, I worked with Harrison Fernandez for a little while. Obviously, doing a degree in sports science and coaching meant that I had a lot of fundamental information already about the S&C world. But the main things that I was struggling with was 1, accountability, and 2, the knowledge of how much to do, load management, because I'm a bit of an animal in the sense of like, I will just go and go and go and go and go. And even when my body feels like shit, I'll be like, oh, I don't want to go to the gym. Next thing you know, 250 is being picked up and I'm like, oh, okay, well that was actually a lot easier than I thought it was. So having someone to take accountability like that to stop you getting wrecked is important. Do you know, it is true though, because I will just go into the gym and be like, I can't be bothered to do this, but whoop, oh, okay, it's going up. And that's when shit can really go wrong. Because if you're not paying attention to that load management, it's only a matter of time before something goes. Self-sabotage. Yeah, exactly. You're trying to get stronger for the right reasons, but you're going about it the wrong way, essentially. So, principles of programming. SMART goal orientated. I'm sure everyone has heard of SMART goals before. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time bound. It's a bunch of fancy words. Just make sure your goal is essentially, it's specific to what you need. So it's not just like a specific, I want to get a really strong bench press. It's not going to help your sport if that's what you care about. Again, measurable, making sure that you can actually measure it in some way. I'm sure every single person here has had times in their life where they've gone to train sport, like strength and conditioning, and they've gone to the gym for maybe 6 weeks and then they've bottled it because they've been like, oh, I'm not seeing any progress, I'm just gonna go home. Out of those people that have done that, which of you actually recorded what you were doing every single session and comparing from start to finish? Not a lot of you. Good if you are, well done. That's because we bullied you to do it. Scheduling, frequency, macro volume and intensity. This is where stuff does get a little bit out of my depth of knowledge, so I will hand over to Josh here because he has got a plethora of knowledge that is way bigger than my extent. So I don't want to bore you with stuff that isn't going to be as valuable as someone like Josh can give you.
He is better at talking though. So with this, it's more about how much you can actually fit into your week sensibly. And we're going to have like really different results through individuals. So for me, the amount of volume I can handle versus the amount of volume Luke can handle is very, very different. I can't do very much and I get injured very easily. So I have to be very careful. Whereas with Luke, like he can do a lot more work. And that also is time management, is stress. We're going to talk about accumulated stress in a bit. I'm really going to try not to say too much on this, but essentially it's just how we organise everything. What are the big factors, like what's getting fatigued over time? How much are we doing overall in that day? From there, I'm just trying to I can't really read my own slide right now. So. Yeah. Oh, recovery, fatigue management. There's a few technical terms here, and it's like maximum recoverable volume is basically as much what can you do and recover from and see results and it not be too dangerous. So that could be determined by loads of things. If you have joint pain in your elbow and you want to do as much bench pressing as possible, sad times it's going to be less. You could be working in a stressful environment and therefore your amount you can handle physically might feel really good, but the recovery is not going to be as good, and therefore you might want to reduce your volume. There's a whole bunch of factors on maximum recoverable volume.
Would it be worth mentioning there about my volume changes recently?
Yeah, so this is actually quite important really. So Luke was strong when I first started talking to him about strength and conditioning, and we started working together on him as an athlete. But I was looking at his volume's unbelievably high. Like I've said, he can handle a lot of volume.
When I say it was high, the
20,000
the weekly Monday session
kilos.
was about 25,000 kilos worth of volume on a Monday, and then I'd go into about a 6-hour coaching session, train PK on a Tuesday. The Wednesday was probably like a 15,000, and then train on a Thursday PK, and then the Friday was probably again like a 25,000 kilo session.
And I'm going to say in context, this is a man who has lots of stress. As someone who has been in the office with him,
and a business to run, and a dog.
So I looked at that and thought, well, we're getting gains, but I can see that there's more strength. The trade-off just
wasn't worth it.
The trade-off wasn't worth it. Also, I kind of felt like we were like on the border, and sometimes you can do too much, and it can just be like I'm just moving this thing, and I'm not. There's no focus. We're not like. We talk about attributes in a bit, so I don't want to like lap myself too much. But he's not training particular attributes, and then we brought all the volume down, focused on what we were actually trying to achieve, and then now what you put, how much on your total?
Considerably
100
lost.
kilos
I mean,
or something.
On what?
On everything.
On everything, yeah. So in 8 weeks, my bench has gone up, I think 10 kilos. My squat went up 15 kilos, and my deadlift went up 20 kilos. And I could go up even further.
And how long have you been training when that happened?
As in?
Like total in your life?
Probably a good number of years, to be honest, but on and off. I think consistently where I've actually been training and training smart are two different things, guys. That's what we kind of have to differentiate. I'm sure a lot of people here have trained before, but whether you've trained smart is a different story. So training, lots of years. Training smart, a year and a half.
The point was the easy gains were gone, so that's
my friend.
Big change.
Is good just to point out is the fact that the stress it just goes into everything. So
exactly.
There's the next
two
slides
that mentions that perfectly later.
Of course, like you said, I train this much Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever. A lot of people can think, stress is only training. No, you have everything outside.
Absolutely.
Yeah, life, relationships, finances, everything.
Kids to deal with and stuff like that, which is a lot of people and a lot of coaches never think about.
Exactly.
That is probably the most important thing.
And that's when an injury will happen.
Yeah,
absolutely. So the trade-off just wasn't worth it. Essentially, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And just because it's working at one time doesn't mean that it will continue to work if you keep pushing it, which I think is the important take-home there. So how it relates to coaching, in-class conditioning versus structured program of conditioning. Realistically, classes just are not long enough or practical enough to deliver high-level effective conditioning without taking the focus away from the actual learning of parkour. Obviously, kids come to your classes, adults come to your classes, and they want to learn parkour, but equally within that, they need to get strong. And I'm sure you guys have had it before where you've gone to set conditioning and you do get a couple of people that instantly just like, fuck this, I'm going, and just don't join in. And at the end of the day, depending on how you run your organization, you could force them to do it or you might not force them to do it. How you do that is entirely up to you. But the take home is in-class conditioning as their only source of conditioning is A, not going to get them the results that they want in terms of becoming the athlete that they want, B, it's not going to protect them from a longevity side of things, and C, it's just going to practically take time away from what they're actually coming in for, so therefore you're probably going to end up losing members as opposed to retaining members. Teaching athletic principles to kids is much more important, most effective through the use of games like Bring Sally Up and partner conditioning, and the sport itself, learning the mechanics of jumping. Essentially, don't necessarily think about giving kids just like press-ups and sit-ups and stuff like that. Our focus, especially from a younger age, is much more about getting them as athletic as possible. The more athletic you are, the more diverse you're going to be in your training, and then, to be honest, the easier you are to mold once you get to an older age. So therefore, if they get to 14 and they're already incredibly athletic, by the time they get there, you can say, all right, where do you want to go down? Do you want to go down that raw power route, or do you want to go down that strength route? Do you want to go down that diverse mix route? So on and so forth.
Something to be said for incorporating conditioning into classes though, you should still do some. I'm not saying don't do it. The reason I say do some is because, one, they actually need to be strong to do parkour, and if they're doing an hour a week, at least if you do push-ups with them and show them how to do them properly, they have the option to do that. So conditioning doesn't have to be separate to like technical training. Conditioning is technical training. You teach someone how to do conditioning properly, it's body control, and you can, as long as you can make sure someone understands why that's important. So like for you guys, if you're struggling with climb up transitions, I would say something like a clean actually is really good. You're transitioning weight through your legs. There's a wrist change. You're getting used to like catching again. It's not the same. It doesn't necessarily completely mimic it, but I can at least relate it to us just being coordinated, being able to use strength through our legs into our arms. And it's the same with the kids. Like if you can teach, say, like, look, if you can hold a good shape here, if you want to learn this flip, then make the good strong shape and talk about it while, like, use it as cues. You can use your, like, we do this in conditioning, so we can do this now, and then use that cue. It's quite useful for especially higher level skills.
Obviously, you have limited time in classes, so focus on the essentials. If you're sat there and say there's one kid that really struggles with like propulsion power on jumping, and you've just set the whole class push-ups as conditioning, you've just wasted that kid's time. It doesn't necessarily mean you've wasted it. Like, it is going to be valuable in some way, but is it the most valuable thing that you could get out from that individual? Probably not. So don't be afraid to like tailor your conditioning to different groups within your class. You can make different things for different people, and that not be too much of a problem. The other thing to mention, which I don't know how many people have thought about, but prepubescent conditioning versus post-pubescent conditioning can look very, very, very different. Very different, and that's just for a number of reasons that we're not going to bore you on, but I'm sure, as I'm sure you guys can imagine, you are pretty much a different human pre-puberty versus post-puberty, so that's obviously going to impact training as well. So we've got a couple of examples of programming here. A is like an introductory frequency, so the focus is much more on parkour with a bit of an even split of exercises across the strength and conditioning week. Think of this as like the initial building blocks towards setting discipline and consistency within your athletes. So say, for example, you run a gym, one of your coaches has come up to you and they go, bro, I'm looking to do some strength and conditioning just to supplement my sport. Is there anything that you could kind of guide me with? That would probably be the type that you're going for, and you'll see the examples in a second. B, hobbyist, is probably what we'd consider like myself, Josh, Jesse, Ryan, all of the sort of training that we do, whereby it's like 3 days a week, we're mixing strength and conditioning pretty evenly with the parkour load and anything else that we ever do. And then athletic frequency, think of it as like the Ed Scott of the S&C world. He's balancing pretty much everything that you could possibly think of known to man, which highlights how much of an incredible athlete he is. But going on to these examples, these are just very rough examples of what this could look like. So I don't want you to look at this program and be like, oh my God, they haven't got this or they've got that in there. This is a very rough example of how you could prescribe things for people. Essentially what you'll see is there's a mixture of different exercises which cross a mixture of different kinetic chains which focus on a mixture of different performance attributes. So if I've lost anyone there, you're doing lots of stuff in lots of different ways, hinging, pulling, pushing, sprinting, plyoing, and it's done across different days. You've probably seen quite a traditional like push-pull leg split, and don't get me wrong, I was a push-pull legs guy for as long as I've ever known. However, one thing that I've recently learned when I've been switching that up is if I switch that up, I've got way more tolerance to reduce junk volume. If I'm doing, say, 30 sets of like quad-based exercises on a leg day, by the time I get to set 10, the rest of that is probably going to be junk volume. And then I'm wasting so much energy just hitting that junk volume because the program says to do so. As if I split that across 3 different days, I've got way more time and way more energy to train that body part multiple times throughout the week to get the results we need without hitting that junk volume level where we're actually just lifting the weight and moving the bar, but nothing's really happening as a result of it.
Just a quick point on this. Like we said, as we said, they're just like rough. We did this kind of quick, so please don't judge us too harshly. but there is an option.
I saw the camera come out.
But there is an option here, especially on like the first example. There's been studies where people have just done a hang clean and a single leg squat, and they've done that for 6 weeks, where they do 2 times a week, and then their vertical jump has gone up by X ridiculous amount. My brain is not the kind of brain that keeps lots of really small pieces of information. I kind of take the overall picture. So I don't know what it was called, I don't know how long it was, but it was really interesting to see that someone just did the smallest, it was literally 2 things twice a week for 6 months and got big athletic results because they just picked good exercises and then they progressively overloaded it. So don't feel like this is the minimum you can do, and that definitely isn't the maximum you can do. And this isn't how you have to program. It's like none of this is specific. It's just examples of like, we can do more, we can do less. When we do less, it needs to be broken down into trying to hit everything the best we can. Okay, so go ahead. You're gonna have to speed through.
Okay, so running a little bit out of time, but we'll try and get through pretty much as quickly as we can. Exercise selection and rep range. Exercise selection is not as important as the correct attribute training. So whether you're worried about whether you should program a front squat, a back squat, or Bulgarian split squat, doesn't really matter. Just focus on the attribute you're training. Are you training for absolute strength? Sick. Then go for something that's going to train absolute strength. Are you training for power? If that's the case, put in 200 kilos on your back and then just squatting once isn't really going to work that. So you need to train for something that's actually going to be applicable to what you're actually trying to get out of it. The way to think about it is low reps and fast trains impulse. So anything between like 1 to 5 reps, we kind of want to do probably somewhere between like 65 to 85% of our 1 rep max, and doing it fast, controlled, really, really well with intent is going to train that impulse. Low reps with close to max lows can be used to train absolute strength. So think like high bar back squat, deep as you like, slow and controlled, and 1 to 8 reps is probably the rep range that you'd be looking at. And then medium to high reps in close proximity to failure for hypertrophy, so like the actual building of the muscle. But what's more important is the adaptation, not the exercise. So remember that when you're programming for yourself, programming for other people.
One little thing to think of there is like, think about what the movement pattern you're training there as well. Because if there's, you can back squat, which is a hinge, and you can back squat, which is more a squat, like more quad dominant, and what doesn't matter, it's not that important right now. But think about what you're trying to achieve in the attribute is like also the specific of what you're trying to do. So if I want to get really good at jumping far, a hingy back squat might not be your best option.
So, sorry, was there any questions? No. Cool. Couple of consideration points on rep ranges and exercise selection. Compound versus non-compound. Obviously, compound movements is basically something that's going to work multiple muscle groups at once. So think like your deadlifts, your bench press, your cleans, that sort of stuff. Generally, they're going to be way better for athletes for the most part, because you can kind of trade off how long you spend in the gym working individual parts. As where if you're working non-compound movements, you're probably going to have to spend a lot more time and effort on each individual part. However, the flip side of that is if you're only doing compound exercises, you are going to be destroyed. Absolutely destroyed. So that's something to bear in mind. There definitely does want to be a bit of a mixture. Again, the muscle groups affected, and link that back to your training. Like if you're one of these athletes like me where parkour definitely is a focus, but I'm not necessarily training strength and conditioning to supplement my parkour now as I was previously, I might want to train my biceps or my triceps and get a bit of size on that. Doing that for your students probably isn't going to give them any benefit. Maybe triceps, probably not so much biceps. But think about the muscle groups that are actually being affected. You don't need to train every single muscle group, and especially from person to person, that's going to be incredibly subjective. Whilst like someone over here might be training like more quad-based stuff, someone over here might need to train more hamstring-based stuff, that sort of thing. And again, going to what I was saying earlier about my own volume, stimulus to fatigue ratio, Obviously, you want to kind of balance that as best as possible. Easier said than done, and that's where having someone else to help you take accountability is definitely worthwhile. And then the real world context. You're not going to do sets of like 30 back squats and then go and coach parkour.
It sucks, yeah.
You can, yeah. It might be a very, very unpleasant time and you might walk away a bit like this, but if that's what you want to do, hey, go for it.
And that kind of goes back to the previous one. Like I use squat as an example, but clean would make more sense for your impulse. Squat would probably make more sense for absolute strength, and then maybe for hypertrophy, it depends what you're aiming to do. You might want to do something like a sissy squat and get like good deep range of motion and just hit those things you're not hitting with the other things.
Do you want to go on to this one, big man?
Yeah, I'm just cautious. I'm very cautious of time. Should I try and be as quick as I can?
Cool.
I basically, the best way I can look at this is that volume needs to change over time. It's another variable, the same as weight. You can't just give someone loads of stimulus straight away. Start them as easy as you can, and always like a minimum effective dose is mentioned here. That's kind of one of my main takeaways here. Like I keep saying, do less. Don't, like the parkour is the important thing. So if you go and like bench press every day, you'll see things like, oh, I'll put 20 kilos on my bench press, benched every day, but I couldn't do bugger all else. So. So minimum effective dose, just think about what's going to actually help. Look at results. If you're doing plyos and your jumps got bigger, good. You don't have to do more plyos. Do more parkour maybe. There's examples of why it's different for different people. Not super important, so I'm not going to say too much about that. Adaptations again. Gradually, yeah, I think we covered that. We'll just move on so I can be quick. I'll do this as well really quickly.
Yep.
With flexibility, there's so many different, like we've already seen, there's different opinions on flexibility. Most of the things I've seen that seem to be from reliable sources are saying as long as we spend a good bit of time in a position, we will improve our ability to go into that position. It doesn't mean we'll be strong there. Resistance training under tension, my hypertrophy training, especially for parkour, we don't want to be massive. Like I'm bigger than I want to be, because I trained like an idiot for ages. Luke's probably bigger than he needs to be, but he really likes being a big guy. So
why not?
Hypertrophy training, we can use that for our stretching. We can use that to make our joints strong in those like stranger positions. And that way we're thinking about how we're structuring our week way better. I'm not saying don't static stretch. I actually think static stretching does work, because if you look at ballet and gymnastics, and when I did martial arts when I was young, I did static stretching, but the static stretching was under tension. So some static stretching is greater than other static stretching. So if I put a block on my back and went to do a forwards fold, that's very different from me just having my body weight there. I'm not lifting, but I have resistance still with, and I can lean into that resistance. There's names for all that stuff, but we won't bother with that right now. Other than that, cardio is one of those things where it kind of doesn't seem important until it's important. If you want to have more volume you can do in a week, do cardio, you will be able to do more in a week. I decided to deep dive on cardio a little while ago, ended up doing some silly business, and realised I could just keep training forever. I did too much and was weak, but if you do more cardio, you'll be able to do more.
I think a really important one there is warm up to the demands of your sport. Like there's probably no end of times you've been into the gym and you've seen people about to squat and they're like, ooh, let me do some of this. And like that is good, but like what's actually way more effective is just get under the fucking bar. Just get under the bar on your back and just sit in that position, mobilized. So like I've got long femur, and if you ask Dan Timms when he done my level 2, my squat was here. I could squat like 160, but I couldn't get down to save my life. And the one thing that single-handedly helped that was warming up to the demands of my sport. So I'd come into the gym, I'd get under the barbell, there'd be the bar on my back, I'd sit there for a little while, I'd maneuver around, and then increase the weight and go up a little bit and just spend time in that position, because your body is very good at adapting. As we're doing stuff like this, like, yeah, it's gonna be helpful. I'm not saying it's not gonna be helpful, but it's not gonna help you in the same way that warming up to the demand of your sport
in line with
help
that.
you.
If you think about what we need to do to warm up for parkour, there's quite a lot of demand on our body. Like warming up doesn't have to be like just swinging your arms and stuff, but it should at least be like do something a little easier before you do something mental. Like I see it a lot, and I don't know if I don't really think of it as contributing to injury as much as you'd expect. I think it's way more actual performance. If we are warm, we are going to perform better. Injury can happen no matter what. I will keep repeating that.
The simple way to explain this stress bucket is if I put too much water in this bottle, it's going to overflow. That's your problems. If I have a valve at the bottom and release some of that water, it makes space for more water. That's the simplest way to describe it.
And if you keep overfilling, you will get injured, you will get sick, you will get mentally ill. Yes, I have experienced all of those things multiple times.
Simultaneously. So don't need to dive too deep into that. I think this is the last, pretty much the last one. Sorry?
You can do cardio, you can increase volume over time.
Honestly, similarly to parkour, graded exposure. If you gradually expose, then your bank of what you can tolerate is going to get better. That's pretty much the simplest way to describe it. Periodization is the changing of variables over time to reach long-term goals. Improving does not happen by repeating the same condition. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. If you're going into the gym, pushing the same numbers and going, why aren't I getting stronger? You're an idiot. That's enough said.
There's a little bit more context to all that, I'm going to say.
But you can't expect to just do the same things over and over and over and over again and see dramatic results. In the same way that you wouldn't just come into parkour and do the same things you do all the time and expect that to help you unlock too much further than what you can already do.
Obviously with technique and drills that becomes different, just to be clear.
Yep.
But in terms of improving our attributes, which is what we're talking about really, we have to have a plan. It's basically the SMART goals thing again. We have to have a plan. We have to formulate it so it changes over time, not just in the small individual sessions, but in bigger blocks. We might do the same thing for 6 weeks, but it should at least get heavier. And then when we change it, we also don't want to be changing it too much. I'm going to talk for 100 years if I carry on, so I'm going to stop.
Over to you, big man. You can finish it off.
You can read it. No. Coaching of kids, be aware of your limitations in terms of what you can do strength and conditioning wise. If you can make them love strength and conditioning, I'd say that's the biggest win you can possibly get. If they can consider doing it at home. I coached Luke when he was young. I made him do some kind of unpleasant conditioning stuff, and weirdly, he loves conditioning now. What I found for me personally, in terms of kind of this aside, in terms of this is for athletes, for kids, the biggest moments I've ever had with kids have been on the back of me making them emotional from working so hard.
Yeah, that's what I was going to kind of lead on with.
Sounds really harsh, but a lot of my students like me still. But if I push them to a point where they understand what it's like to fail and then realise this is what actual failure is, I'm not just can't be bothered anymore. I've pushed so hard that my body can't physically do a push-up. There's a big emotional response, and then past that, they then have a connection with you that's surpasses everything, because they're like, I can do more than I thought I could do. And going back to what we spoke about with ladies and training ladies, that's one of the biggest things with female practitioners that I found is if I push them really hard, as long as I care about them and I'm making it very clear that I'm doing this because I'm on their side, that's it. I seem to have a moment, and then that connection changes that whole environment. Because it can be you might have kids that are quite different in your classes, and those kids, if they have a moment of that, I can do more than I thought I could do, especially with neurodiverse kids, sometimes they can push harder than anyone. So if you can show them that little thing, then they're like, oh, I did this, I can't concentrate and stand in a line very well, but I can push really hard.
I think one more thing to add on top of that.
I'm quite passionate about that.
One more thing to add on top of that is generally with conditioning, there isn't so much of a fear. Obviously there is once you get to extreme levels, don't get me wrong, but particularly for conditioning in classes, there's not really going to be so much of a fear associated with that, as where things in actual parkour, there's going to be fear associated. So you're actually helping develop that mental resilience and putting them in a place where they are just as uncomfortable as they probably are going to be when there's fear associated it, but without the fear. So then they're almost killing two birds with one stone. They're not only actually developing their physical conditioning, they're developing their mental resilience, which is then going to directly translate back into PK as well.
And then really the main things for you guys if you're training, I would just think about these three. So gradually increase. Injury is worse than sub-max gains. I learn this at least once a year. And then train attributes, because that's what we're here to do in this instance. If you want to get big and muscly, fine. Be a bodybuilder, do bodybuilding training, but this is for parkour. That's not your aim. So yeah, there you go. To me again now.
Thank you so much. Very quickly, we just have 2 questions, and we're going to roll straight into the next one, which is going